Hi, I'm Sami, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. And today I am bringing you the woman who is the one that I reached out to before I even started this podcast to get the complete scoop on podcasting for fun, for career advancement, for just kicking it with your homies. I have Andrea Klunder, who is the host of the Creative Impostor, and she's quite the podcast maven. I'm just scratching the surface. Andrea, could you give us a little bit more of an intro about you and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the producer and host of The Creative Imposter, as you mentioned, and that was my first podcast. But then what happened is I started a podcast and became quickly addicted to podcasting in general and all things podcasting. And from there, I grew a business consulting, teaching, training, facilitating, producing, and editing podcasts for other people as well, and now other brands and businesses and nonprofit organizations. So it's all podcasting all the time over here. I also have another show called Podcast Envy, which is all about the craft and culture of podcasting. And like I said, I help support a lot of other people in figuring out how to get the ideas in their head out of their mouths through technology and out into the interwebs for people to listen to conveniently in their headphones, in their earbuds, in their car speakers, wherever it is that they're listening to their shows.
And you've had such a wide diversity of clients. For the folks who are listening, Andrea has worked with schools in Chicago. Like, you worked with an opera house in like the Southwest, I want to think.
Santa Fe. Mm-hmm.
There you go. So Santa Fe, which feels like you probably met people like after the musical Rent because they all went to Santa Fe, I think, if I recall that musical correctly. So you've worked with, and the school system that you worked with, it was an internet city school working with teens. So you've had quite a diversity in clients. Now, what do you think, in your opinion, is what draws people initially to podcasts, and what kind of people do you think gravitate towards the medium?
Yeah, it's super interesting because podcasting is growing and booming right now. We're having a moment, and a lot of people think podcasts are new. They're not new at all. They've been around. Technically, podcasts have been around longer than the iPhone, if you can believe that. But when the iPhone,
Ooh,
yeah,
back in the day.
I know, right? Like people used to have to take their MP3 player, an iPod or a different model of a different brand, and connect it to the internet and then like download audio files to their device to listen to later. And it used to be this super kind of nerdy niche thing that nobody really knew about. And then once the iPhone took off, podcasting really started to take off. But then it stayed the same for a while, and some people knew about it and some people didn't. And even the first time I heard of a podcast was when I had a different business. I was a yoga studio owner, and some of my yoga clients asked me, would you ever consider doing a yoga podcast? And I'm like, I have no idea what that even is. And so that was how I got introduced to listening to podcasts to check out this suggestion that I had from some of my clients. And then I think somewhere around the last couple of years, all of a sudden there was another boom when some podcasts, like people always mention the podcast Serial, when they went mainstream and regular news publications and media started covering podcasts, more and more people started listening to them. And so I think now you have more people than ever who actually know what a podcast is. You have more and more easy ways that you can listen to them, since you can get them on Spotify, for example, or Pandora, that a lot of people who have businesses, who have brands, who have organizations, who have a hobby, who have a community, who have all these different things, are thinking of, how can I use a podcast to get my message out there? How can I use a podcast to grow my business? How can I use a podcast to have an excuse to hang out with people that I want to spend more time with, but maybe they don't live in the same city as I do, etc. And so I think that all of those factors have led to this growth and this boom. And not to mention the fact that the technology has gotten easier. and more accessible and more affordable for people to be able to create their own shows. And so it's a win both on the listener side and on the potential content producer side.
For sure. I remember before I started this podcast that I was really intimidated by the tech. Because you look at how Joe Rogan has like his like soundproof booth, and like all these people have these giant microphones, and I'm looking at like my rinky dink setup, and I'm just like, oh, do podcasts. Like I had no idea, and I think a lot of people have been intimidated, even though there are definite benefits. Like for me, I use this as a vehicle for my own personal networking. Like it's such a great way for me to reach out to people who I might not ordinarily be able to speak with, and then essentially pick their brain. So it's been cool for me.
It's so much better to reach out to somebody and say, would you like to be a guest on my podcast, than to say, hey, do you want to meet me for a cup of coffee for an hour?
Yeah, hey, I'm a rando. Let's get a frap. No, it's completely true. And I bet there's a lot of folks bored at home. There's probably a group of college dudes who are like, guys, just the conversations we have at the couch are hilarious. We need to record this for the world. There has to be a lot of people who are thinking that. What is, if somebody's deciding, hey, I want to try this out, what's a good, easy way for them to do a minimum viable product, just have some fun with it, and just decide if they like it? What's a good way for them to start?
For sure. So I am going to back up a little bit and say that the tech is one of the biggest hurdles and obstacles that people face. Typically, when I'm consulting with somebody, that's where most of their nuts and bolts questions are. And I will also confess to you that I am now at the point where I am an audio snob. Like, I do have a fancy broadcast grade microphone, and I do prefer certain software over other software. And I do like shows to be edited, and I like to have all the bells and whistles whenever possible. And yet, I also started from not really knowing very much. Like, my major tech background, I actually have a bachelor's degree in film and video production and mass media, but I got that degree in the late 90s when the technology was definitely not what it was now. I always tell people I took a film editing class where we shot 16 millimeter black and white silent film, and then we actually cut the film strip and pasted it together to make calculus.
It does. For Gen Z, they're probably like, oh my God, did this like lady go to film school with Greta Garbo? And it sounds like you're like back in the 30s. We were clipping this, you know. Um,
Totally. And we did have digital editing workstations as well. But what I think that I learned, or what I took away from that very manual process of learning how to create media literally with my hands, was a way to think about what you're creating as a craft, as an art, as something that you get to enjoy learning the process and the theory and the motivation and the passion and the story behind it, and not get stuck on the technology. And so I will talk about tech in a second, but what I do want to say is that the place to focus if you're thinking about having a podcast is to really start with, why do you want to do this? Why do you even want to bother with learning the tech? Why do you even want to go down this road? Like, what is it that is compelling you, or that is curious, or that is interesting? And to really think about that purpose behind it, because that why, and that could be, like you said, I have a bunch of friends that I hang out with, and our conversations are hilarious. Now, personally, I may have some opinions about whether that content is actually as hilarious as
so
most
with the
people think it
comment
is.
section, yes. So will the future comment section, yes.
However, it might be that I work for a social impact organization, or volunteer for a social impact organization, and we have a really important message or purpose that we want to get out there and share. Or it might be that I have this great business that I run, but I want to be able to share how I'm helping people with a wider range of people than who I can see face to face in my geographic area. Or it might just be that I have a really compelling story to tell that I feel like other people could benefit from, and I want a way to formalize my thoughts and express them. And so when you connect with why it is that you want to do this thing in the first place, and you get really clear about that, is going to answer a lot of your how questions. And it's also going to keep you going when something is frustrating, or when you do have to spend some money on a new piece of technology or software, or when you feel frustrated because not as many people are listening to your show as you imagined when you looked at like how popular Joe Rogan is, for example. So a lot of those things can be corrected by looking at this why, so that you feel supported in what it is that you're doing. And once you have that why figured out, then you can decide what your show is about. What is the topic? What do you want to talk about? And then you can decide, how do you want to go about doing it? Are you a solo show? Is it just you? Are you doing it with one co-host? Are you guys both in the same space? Obviously, in this moment that we're recording this, you're probably not in the same space unless you live together. But are you typically in the same space? Or are you across the country or across the world from each other? Do you want to have a group of you? Is it like 4 of you who are always on? Or are you interviewing people like we're doing right here? Because each of those different types of podcast or styles of episodes are going to require a different kind of tech solution for what it is that you want to create.
That's a good point, because a lot of times, at least for me, when I started this, like my why kind of, there was like a short-term why, because I had this opportunity to interview. Like when I talked to you the first time, like my thing was, why I started was because Kimra Luna, who is like a mentor and a big time person in my industry, she was just saying, hey, if anybody wants to interview me, I have some time. I'm just opening up my audience and my knowledge to whoever. And I was like, holy crap, I totally want to do this. So I pushed out like 7 episodes, and then I got to interview her, and it was super cool. And then it led me to go back to my long-term why, which was I wanted to give a different perspective on career development with a lot of practical tips and applications. So that kind of carried me through, even as I did evolve my tech. And I found that like there's so many options today. I don't have the most advanced tech setup now. I do a Zoom thing, and then I go into my editor, and then I clippity clip. But there's plenty of ways to get started. Like I think one of the easiest new tools that I know is Anchor FM, which is probably good for someone who's just testing different styles, even though it's probably, I don't know how you feel about Anchor FM, and we can talk about that, because you're
How
probably
opinionated do you want me to be, Sami?
like, I feel like that's like asking the Hell's Kitchen guy about, what do you think about shake and bake? Yeah, because that's like the
Totally.
podcast version of shake and bake, or like boxed macaroni and cheese or something like that.
You do definitely need to pick and choose where you're going to spend your resources. And your resources include money. So you can spend more money, or you can spend more time, or you can spend more effort, or you can spend more energy. So it depends on what you have available to you. Like when I started my show, I actually had just filed bankruptcy from my previous business, my yoga studio business, and I didn't have financial resources up front. So I did have to start from scratch. I had to DIY a lot of things. And what that meant is that I had to put more time into learning how to do stuff and like combing through free tutorials online, rather than paying for a current updated easy to follow course, or buying a fancy microphone, or whatever it was. The basics of starting a show, if you want to get really granular, is that you need a few things. You need a recording device. You need something to record audio on. That can be your laptop, that can be your phone, it can be your tablet, it could be a digital recorder. There's a company that makes digital recorders that I personally really called Zoom. And those recorders, depending on what type of recorder you need and what it's for, can be great anywhere from like a budget of $100 to like over $1,000, right? So there's a huge range, but you can totally start with what you have. You need to have some kind of microphone or microphones, depending on how many of you there are speaking. My preference is that everyone who is speaking has their own microphone. So sometimes you'll see like a picture online, and it's 6 people sitting around one table, huddled around this one like microphone. It's not ideal.
Does that make you cringe? Or even before social distancing, you were like, oh, why, guys? Why?
Yeah, it totally makes me cringe. If that's where you're starting, it's where you're starting. And you have to think about what is the purpose of your show. If you're really just doing it as an excuse to get together with your friends and have fun, and if people listen, hey, great, then maybe that's fine. But if you are trying to represent yourself as a thought leader or as a brand, or if you're trying to represent your business, that's probably not going to produce the quality that you want to represent your brand on the other side. So it depends again on what is your why, what is your purpose for doing this. But a microphone doesn't have to be expensive either. You can get a very good quality USB microphone that can attach straight into your computer. The one that I'm currently recommending, and of course this changes as technology changes, so I'm always hesitant to recommend microphones because they change. But the one that I'm currently recommending is by Samson. It's called the Q2U, and it's very beginner friendly. It's a very decent sound quality, and you can usually get it online from Amazon or B&H Photo or whoever for $50. And so it can make a huge upgrade from what I tell people I never want them to use, if at all possible, is the built-in microphone on their laptop. Like, it just doesn't sound good. You're better off even plugging in like your Apple earbuds or whatever and using the microphone on there. You're better off doing that than doing like the ambient microphone on your computer. But something to record your voice. Headphones, earbuds, okay. I prefer over the ear headphones if you can at least drop $30 or whatever on a decent pair of over ear headphones. And then you need to have some kind of software. So the software can be the program that you're using to record yourself. And in some cases, also, depending on whether you are going to be doing your editing, or if you have a budget to hire out your editing and that's not something you want to spend your time doing or learning how to do, then maybe you don't need to worry about editing software, but you're going to need something to record. So for example, you mentioned using Zoom, which is usually for conferencing, and tons of people now are using Zoom who've never used it before. And it's okay. It's not the platform that necessarily has the highest level of audio quality. But like you said,
True
if you
that.
are just getting started, or if you just don't want to spend a ton of money and you want to stick with something that people know how to use, it can be an okay solution. It's not my favorite. There's the audio snob in me, but it can be an okay solution. And then you can always get fancier from there. The software that I currently love, which you got to experience with me on my show for recording remote interviews, is called Squadcast. And again, this is something that changes over time. I did not recommend Squadcast when they first came out because they were way too buggy, but now they've had time to really stabilize their product, and it's a great way to connect with people remotely. It has a higher sound quality level, but the trade-off is that you do have to pay per month to use it, right? And their plans change periodically. It's somewhere between $15 and $30 a month, depending upon like how many interviews you're doing and stuff like that. So the basics are you need a device to record upon, you need a microphone, you need headphones, you need software. From there, in order to get your show out to the masses, you need something called a podcast host. So that's where you mentioned a service called Anchor, which I do have very strong opinions about Anchor, and it is not something that I typically recommend. However, it is free. So there's that benefit, right? If you're just dipping your toes in the water and you're trying to see if this is something that you enjoy doing, is this something I want to stick with? It might be an okay place to start. I personally recommend upgrading just a little bit from there. And one place I do definitely recommend investing whatever financial resources you have is in a podcast host that has been around for a long time. That's more of your standard traditional podcast host that has a lot of longevity, that has a lot of service and tech support behind them. The company that I personally use for all of my shows and for all of my clients is called Libsyn, which is Libsyn. It's a shortening of Liberated Syndication. And generally, you can get an account with Libsyn for somewhere between $5 to $20 per month. So hopefully it's not breaking the bank, but it is a little bit of an investment. But what you get in return for that investment is that all of your files are going to be formatted properly for all of the platforms. You get an easy way to get your show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, all these other weird places that people in other countries around the world use that I've never heard of, like Deezer, for example. And you know that your files are formatted properly, that they're secure. Like, I could put my audio files on my WordPress website, but there's a much higher chance that my WordPress website is going to get hacked, it's going to crash, it's going to have problems than Libsyn servers. So I
And
like that feeling of security, that I know my show is in a really stable place, and that if there's a tech problem, they have a whole tech support staff that's way smarter than I am about those kinds of things.
I would agree with that. I use Libsyn, and what I like about it is that you can actually set up in the settings where it will send things like to YouTube.
Yeah.
So it really does set up things really simple for you. It's not that expensive. And I hope that the listeners are taking from your really great comments and all your insight is the fact that this can be an evolution. It's something where you can, and I always recommend with any sort of content creation or anything like this that could be a lot of time investment, start out from a place of play. Think about how this can be fun for you. Think about what you would do for your podcast, that even if it wasn't getting some transactional value for you, whether that is like getting a new client or having a recruiter reach out to you in case it's an industry podcast, you'd still do it for free. So I think you've shared a lot of really cool stuff, and we only have so much time left in the interview. But one thing that I found that I didn't realize would become more of a mental challenge for me, because you think about the tech first, is structuring your episodes, finding good interviewers, making sure that you're telling a story, because you don't just want to record something, send it out, and it's something that doesn't have a compelling quality to it that makes people want to listen. So I know we only have so much time, and I want to give space at the end for you to tell people where to find you and your shows, but can you talk a little bit or some advice on how someone can think about telling a story in their podcast structure? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Making sure that this isn't boring, even if it sounds great.
Exactly. And you're bringing up a good point, which is that because the tech has gotten easier and more affordable and more accessible, and because podcasting has gotten more popular, more people than ever are launching podcasts, which is fantastic because you can never run out of great podcasts to listen to. However, there is this trend, this thing that we call in the industry called pod fading. Have you heard this word before?
No.
So pod fading is what happens when you're so excited, you put all this time and effort into launching your show, and then you do maybe 7 or 8 episodes tends to be the threshold, and then you never produce another episode ever again. You never tell your listeners you're stopping the show. You just stop making the show. And those 7 episodes or whatever live out there on the internet. And then people will discover it. And then they're like, wait, there's been no new episodes since 2015. What happened to this show? And what generally happens is a few things. One, people realize how much time and effort, and in some cases money, they're spending on creating this thing, and they're not seeing the quote unquote results that they expected fast enough. Or people had a great idea, but they didn't think beyond those first 4 people that they wanted to interview. And they're like, I don't even know what to do next. Or people get discouraged by the amount of listeners that they have. And that's something that I think isn't accurately represented a lot of times with some of these podcast coaches and consultants and people that have these fancy courses and stuff like that, is they talk about all of the benefits of podcasting, which are true, but they don't accurately represent how it can take a long time. It's what we call long tail in the marketing speak. It's long tail marketing. But even if you're not trying to market or you're not trying to promote something specifically, it can take a long time to build up your listener base and to build your audience and to grow those followers. And so the key is to keep going, to not pod fade into the distance once you started your show.
Like the Lone Ranger off
going,
on the horizon.
right? That's always what I think of. The sun is setting. Bye, never see you again. The key to keep going is to love what you're doing. And the way that I say you do with this is to think about, what are you curious about? I always recommend for people who take my classes or work with me, before you ever record anything, get out a piece of paper, do it analog, and make a list of 20 possible episodes around your topic. And that could be a topic, that could be a person that you want to interview. It doesn't even necessarily be a person who you think would say yes. Like you could put Oprah Winfrey on your list for all I care. But 20 episode ideas. And then keep going. Can you come up with 30? Can you come up with 50? Can you come up with 100 episode ideas around your topic? And if you are coming at this from, I am the expert and I'm going to tell all the people this thing, you're probably going to run out of ideas before you get to 100. But if you can connect with what you are curious about, what do you want to learn? What do you want to ask questions about? Who do you want to pick their brain, which I hate that phrase, but who do you want to spend time with? Who do you want to get to know on a deeper level? What do you want to explore more deeply? You're going to keep coming up with more and more ideas. And you're not committed to this 100 episode list. It can change and it can grow and it can morph. But if you're having trouble getting 20 ideas or getting beyond that, it might not be the right topic for your show. You might need to think in a slightly different way, or maybe you just need to spend a little bit more time thinking on that before you dive into the content. Obviously connecting with the why, but then even more so structuring how you're going to share this content can also help you to keep going. Because as we have all learned during this shelter in place period, not having structure is awful. We always say we don't want structure and we want freedom to do whatever. And the cool thing about podcasting is you do have the freedom. You're the producer, you're the executive producer. You can make your show any way that you want, which is awesome, but it also can be overwhelming. So thinking of a structure for your show, in addition to the topics, how do you come up with a structure? Listen to other podcasts, figure out what you like in those other podcasts and what you don't like in those other podcasts. Do you want it to be a free-flowing conversation? Do you like shows that are an hour long, or do you like shows that are 20 minutes long? Do you like it when they put a little clip at the beginning of the show that's like a sneak peek or a preview of what the upcoming interview is before the intro? Or does that annoy you? Do you like having shows that have music in the intro? Do you like shows where they have 6 ads during the intro before the actual content of the episode starts? There's so many different ways that you can structure your show. And the key is starting with, what do I like? What do I enjoy listening to? What do I enjoy making? And then you can figure out what your audience likes down the road. But I say start with what you enjoy consuming and what you enjoy creating, and figure out your structure in that way. If you're doing interviews, do you have a set list of questions that you ask every guest the same questions every time? That's one way to do it. Or is it totally free flowing? Or do you have 2 or 3 questions that you always start with and always end with, and then the rest is open? You get to experiment and figure out what works for you. And you might try it one way, and then 5, 10 episodes later say, this thing isn't really working that much for me, or I'm getting bored with this, I'm going to shift it a little bit. And you always have the freedom to do that. But really figuring out what you like is going to be a great way to keep your show going and figure out what that structure is.
That is wonderful advice, because with podcasting, it can feel like you're talking into the abyss sometimes.
Who
I
is
feel
listening? Who is my audience?
exactly who's out there. But if you're going to dance like nobody's watching, you might as well play the music of your choice, which I think
Yeah.
is the benefit to doing this kind of adventure, because I like to think about it as a fun adventure, and I hope that everybody who's been listening, they've enjoyed this as their own sort of adventure, and thinking about, if I did do a podcast, what would that be like? So I hope they all had that, and I know that we're getting towards the end, and of course you got more interviews and podcasting things to do, so how about you tell us all where we can find you on the web, how we can work with you, how we can listen to your show, all the deets.
Absolutely. So my website is thecreativeimposter.com. And you can find both the Creative Imposter podcast and the Podcast Envy podcast. How many times can I say the word podcast in one sentence?
Podcast.
You can find both of those there, as well as links to listen to them in the three most popular platforms, which are Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. But of course, whatever your favorite listening app is, you should be able to find those shows there. And at this moment in time, I am offering some complimentary consultations, just 20-minute consultations. Sami, I think in the old days you got a whole hour, which I'm not even doing anymore. So you lucked
Oh,
out.
I bribed you when you were like, oh, this could be 20 minutes. And I'm like, how much do I got to pay you for an hour? I was like, no, don't even need to upsell me. I need this information and I'm too lazy to research myself. Here's money. Do my homework.
A complimentary 20-minute consultation if you want to just run your idea by me, or you're just like, this is how I'm thinking of doing it. What are the top 3 things that I need to do to get started, or something like that. So there is a link there, but it's thecreativeimposter.com/T420, TEA, like the thing you drink, FOR20. And then you can schedule a complimentary call with me. And I'm also going to be offering, I usually do these in-person free classes for launching your podcast that are like a broad overview of how to choose your tech, how to get everything set up, and what you need to think about. I usually do those in person in Chicago. Since we're not doing that, I thought, hey, why not do the exact same thing online, and then more people can come to it. So I'm going to be doing one of those. I don't have the date, but it will be coming up soon, depending on when this episode comes out. And the best way for someone to find out when that is going to be and be a part of that is to join my Facebook group, which is also free. So you can find the Creative Imposter group on Facebook. And that way, I know that there are 2 classes that people have requested. One is the launch class, and one is a class that I haven't created yet, which is how to get better interviews.
Awesome. I feel like that interview one is a must listen for, or just like something that's a must for at least me, because I feel like I'm getting better, but oh my God, who knows? It's been like, this is like what, like nearly getting to 80 episodes now. Hopefully I've gotten better, but I feel like it's always good to learn new things. But anyway, Andrea, thanks so much for being on my show. I feel like I've learned a lot. Hopefully everybody's learned a lot. It's just been great to have you.
It is always my pleasure to connect with you.
Awesome. And thank you all for listening to the Career Kickstart Show. As always, I'm Sami Gardner, your career specialist. Bye. Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.